Title: He Left, but He Came Back. The small town of Cedar Hollow had always been the kind of place where everyone knew each other's business. It was the kind of place where a wave from a neighbor could be counted on, where the grocery store felt like a social gathering, and where every street had a memory attached to it. People grew up here, lived their whole lives here, and then, for the most part, died here. There was a certain predictability to Cedar Hollow that made it seem, to an outsider, like a place stuck in time. For Ethan, though, it was suffocating. From a young age, he had known that he wasn't meant to stay. He wanted more. He wanted excitement, opportunity, adventure. The kind of things you couldn't find in a place like Cedar Hollow. Everyone in the town followed the same path. High school, a summer job, then a career that would keep you close to home, maybe even working at the local lumber mill or as a farmer. That was the rhythm of the town, and it wasn't one Ethan could follow. Ethan grew up with the scent of fresh-cut wood in the air and the sound of old trucks rumbling down the street. His father, a quiet, sturdy man who had worked at the mill his entire life, always told him that the best life was one rooted in hard work and stability. His mother, equally steady and calm, always said there was no shame in living simply. But Ethan didn't want that. He didn't want to wake up every day with the same view, the same people, the same routines. At 18, the year after he graduated high school, Ethan made his decision. He didn't tell anyone, not even his parents. It wasn't that he didn't love them, or that he didn't care, but there was something liberating about leaving without ceremony. He simply packed a bag, wrote a note to his parents, and left in the middle of the night. He didn't want the long goodbyes, the questions, or the attempts to change his mind. He had made his choice, and he was gone. Ethan arrived in the city, a vast, sprawling world that seemed to pulse with life in a way Cedar Hollow never could. There were thousands of people, each with their own dreams and stories. In the city, Ethan could be anyone. He didn't need to be the boy who grew up in Cedar Hollow, the son of the mill worker, the quiet kid who didn't fit in. Here, he could reinvent himself. The first few months were harder than Ethan had expected. He had no formal education, no skills to speak of, and no connections. The jobs he found were grueling, low-paying, menial tasks that barely kept him afloat. He worked as a janitor at a corporate office, a waiter at a crowded restaurant, and sometimes even picked up shifts at a local convenience store. The city wasn't kind to someone starting from nothing. But Ethan was determined. Slowly, he began to understand the rhythm of the city, its pulse. He took night classes at a community college, learning everything he could about business, marketing, and technology. He networked whenever he could, met people who had the kinds of connections that could open doors, and little by little, the city became his. The grind became easier. Soon, Ethan landed a job in a small but promising startup. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid better than anything he had ever earned, and it gave him a taste of the life he had always dreamed of. Years passed. Ethan's career took off. He moved up the ranks, started his own business, and eventually became a respected figure in his industry. He had everything he had ever wanted: money, success, freedom. He drove a sleek car, lived in a modern apartment in the heart of the city, and wore suits that made him look like he belonged in the rooms he entered. But something began to feel off. The fast-paced city that had once excited him now felt empty. The friends he made were colleagues who only existed in the context of business. His relationships were shallow and fleeting, as everyone seemed to be chasing the same success. There was always another meeting, another deal to close, another project to complete. The noise of the city had become deafening. Ethan found himself feeling more isolated than he had ever been. The friends he had made were distant acquaintances. and even when he spent time with them, he couldn't shake the feeling that they didn't really know him. His family in Cedar Hollow had become an afterthought. He rarely called his parents, and when he did, the conversations were short and strained. His mother would ask about his life, and he would give her the bare minimum, changing the subject whenever she tried to make plans for a visit. He felt guilty, but he justified it to himself. He was too busy, too successful, too important. It wasn't until a late evening in his office, staring out at the city skyline, that it hit him. Ethan was standing on the balcony of his penthouse apartment, watching the lights below, when he realized how empty it all was. The city, the work, the money, none of it mattered if it didn't come with people who genuinely cared for him. None of it meant anything without the sense of belonging he had once taken for granted. Cedar Hollow, for all its smallness, for all its simplicity, had once been a place that gave him peace. A place where people knew his name. A place that, no matter how far he had gone, would always be home. It was a feeling he had been avoiding for years, but now it was undeniable. The feeling of homesickness, of longing, of needing something real, something tangible, something more than the shallow world he had built for himself. Ethan hadn't realized how much he missed his family, the quiet mornings with his parents, the way his father would sit in his favorite chair, sipping coffee and reading the paper. He missed the sound of his mother humming in the kitchen while she cooked dinner. He missed the slow rhythm of life in Cedar Hollow. One night, after a particularly exhausting week, Ethan decided he couldn't ignore the pull any longer. He reached for his phone and dialed his mother's number, the number he had memorized since he was a child. His heart pounded in his chest as it rang. "Hello?" His mother's voice came through the line, familiar and warm. "Hi, Mom," Ethan said softly. "It's me, Ethan." There was a long pause before she responded. "Ethan? Is everything okay? You've been so quiet lately." "I'm fine, Mom," he replied. I just wanted to hear your voice. I've been thinking about home, about Cedar Hollow." His mother's voice softened. "You're always welcome here. You know that. We miss you. It's been too long since we've seen you." Ethan swallowed hard. "I know. I've been busy, Mom. Too busy." "Well, Cedar Hollow hasn't changed. We're here, whenever you're ready to come home." The words hung in the air, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt the weight of his choices. He had built a life in the city, but in doing so, he had abandoned the life that had shaped him, that had given him everything he needed to grow. He realized that no amount of success could replace the feeling of belonging, the warmth of family, and the peace of a place that was his own. That night, after he hung up, Ethan made a decision. He booked a flight home for the next week. No more waiting. No more excuses. He would return to Cedar Hollow, not just physically, but emotionally. He would reconnect with his roots, with the people who had loved him unconditionally, and with the part of himself that he had buried in the pursuit of something bigger. When he arrived in Cedar Hollow, the town looked almost the same as when he had left. The streets were familiar, the shops unchanged, the air filled with the same scent of pine and wood smoke. His parents' house was just as he remembered it, small, cozy, and surrounded by trees. As his mother opened the door to greet him, her smile was the same as when he had left all those years ago. "Welcome home, Ethan," she said, her voice thick with emotion. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he had found his way back. Not just to the town, but to himself. The city, with all its noise and distractions, no longer held the same allure. Cedar Hollow, with its simplicity and quiet rhythm, was where he truly belonged. In the end, Ethan realized that the success he had chased in the city would never compare to the peace he found in the place he had once called home. He had left, but now he had come back, not just to Cedar Hollow, but to the man he had been before ambition took him away. And in that return, he found what he had been searching for all along: a sense of belonging, a sense of peace, and a sense of home.